Thanks for joining us for this episode of Old Men Know Stuff. Here's your host, Dan Witham.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Old Men Know Stuff, our podcast. This one is episode 9. So you can go back and check on the first 8. We appreciate your feedback that we believe the Lord has given us this opportunity, and we have something to say, both spiritually and today is experientially. What we've learned over our 49 years of broadcast ministry, all of it for the Lord. Well, actually, the first 8 years were partially for the Lord, and some of it was with ESPN and what have you. The experiences that we've gotten today, I believe, will be very informative to you. As a producer director, many times we've had to go outside the 4 walls of a church, outside the 4 walls of a TV studio. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. I want to introduce someone to you right now that is a highly experienced veteran. Joe, you there?
I am, Dan. How are you?
I'm very good, very good. Joe and I go way back. And when I say way back, you're about to experience that. But I believe we're going to be discussing the art, spirit-led art, I might add, of field production, field producing, and videography for the Lord. And I think there's nobody better with more experience that I can think of than Joe. And let me read you some of his good stuff. He's an award-winning photographer, an international humanitarian. He's a filmmaker, has worked in more than 85 nations. That's a few more than me, Joe.
It's not a race, Dad.
His work takes him to places where people are at their worst, and I've seen that. His stills are published in National Geographic Traveler and American Photo. He's an Emmy Award, George Foster Peabody Award, Pulitzer Prize. I'm telling you all this because you've got information coming at you that you definitely want to retain. And right now his passion, like as mine, that's why we're doing this very podcast specifically on the art of field production and videography for the Lord, what we've learned. And you're going to hear some experiences that we've gone through. But his passion is teaching others to use the gear and shoot the best photography or videos that they're capable of. And I welcome Joe to how's things in Grand Rapids, Joe?
I looked at the news this morning and it was hot everywhere else. It's not hot here. It started out as a beautiful day. It's going to be raining, it looks like. But man, this is a time of year that we look forward to in February. I always run a Get Me to Hot Weather special in January and February. So if anyone out there is thinking about hiring a shooter, producer, filmmaker for a warm climate, hit me up in January and February and you'll get a good deal.
Joe's the man. Joe's also a very, very gifted writer. And for those of us that are producers for the Lord and other, writing is really the genesis of anything we do. That it's like a songwriter. You write the script, the copy, and then you go do the melody, or you do the melody and write the script. But the point is, it's your foundation for what you're trying to communicate. Hey, Joe, let's start with your background and locations. I've got a few of my own that are going to be informative to the people. But before we break down things like mics, lighting, cameras, etc., tell them about where you've been, what you've seen.
Oh, man. First, just so that we don't miss it, Dan, what you just said about writing being essential to our craft is killer. If people hear only one thing, but they get that one, that's amazing, because people who can write set themselves apart from the others in the room. I've seen you do it, Dan, when we'll be in the studio or in the field, something comes up and you'll grab your big Sharpie and a pad of paper and start making copy, which any skilled on-camera person can use. So learn how to write. I've been doing this for about, I think 44 years. I like the title you have here, Old Men Know Stuff. I get the whole know stuff bit, but I really don't understand the old men part. I don't know when I'm going to hit that, but one of these days. It reminds
Hey, Joe.
Yeah.
You'll know.
That's what I've been told. It kind of reminds me of a used car salesman who says, "It's not the years, it's the mileage." And yeah,
you'll know when you pick up that backpack and you say, "I shouldn't have done that."
Yeah, as you said, Dan, I've done 85 nations of the world, roughly. I think it might be more than that now. Almost all of Africa, all of Central America, a lot of South America, extensively in Southeast Asia and Central Asia, a lot in Europe, incredibly deep into the Middle East. So it's, I've been around, done a whole lot of stuff, both live and for later use, in all forms of this thing. My first gig in television was carrying stuff and running cables. And since then, I've done just about every other role, including the on-camera roles. And so with those number of years, you either can get a whole lot of experience or you can get really good at one thing. And I've gotten a lot of experience. But of course, Dan, you know that experience is what you get when you don't get what you want. So, but I've been able to get a lot of
that again.
Yeah.
But it breeds knowledge, Joe.
Amen.
Which breeds wisdom, which is our anchor of this podcast. Old Men Know Stuff. Proverbs 4:7. With all you're getting, get wisdom and understanding, and that's what we're trying to communicate in the art of field production and videography in this podcast. So give me one or two or three of your perilous locations, Joe.
The perilous ones. My wife and I were just talking about this one the other day. We're with our oldest daughter, who now lives in Iceland. There was a trip where I was going to be doing some work in the Dadaab refugee camp, which is just inside of Somalia, at the border of Kenya. And the road from Garissa to the refugee camp at that point in time is known as one of the most dangerous roads in the world. And as we were there, all sorts of things led up to this, but finally, when we were on the road on our way, we left in the middle of the night so that nobody would yell at us for not having a convoy that we're traveling with.
Right.
And the driver said, in about 2 minutes, we're going to lose cell service. So if you have anyone that you want to call and tell them where you are, this would be a good time. So I knew it was too late to call my wife where she was on the East Coast. So I called my daughter, who was in university at that point, and said, how are things going? I don't have much time, but here, let me give you some stuff. And I gave her the driver's name, his phone number, the registration of the car. I gave her all this stuff, and she said, "Dad, what's going on?" And I said, "Oh, it's okay, no problem. I'll call you again tomorrow." And she said, "Okay, but what do I do with this?" And I said, "Well, if I don't call you tomorrow, this is the stuff you're going to need to try to find me." So,
or here's the key to the our PO box back home.
Right. Yeah. And so that was perilous. I've been held at gunpoint at the Afghan-Pakistan border for 2 days, abducted because of making some people uncomfortable in a Hindu temple, again in Southeast Asia. Gosh, there's perilous stuff doesn't have to come from people. It can come from what's around you as well. And you know, in one project, I set up underneath of the shade of a tree where there was this huge bee's nest up there, and I didn't know it until I looked at my hand when I scratched my ear, and I noticed it was covered with bees. And so at that point, Dan, what you don't do is take off your baseball hat and start swatting them, because that's what I did. They all went into my hair. And so my assistant on the trip, and this is one of the good reasons to have an assistant with you.
Right.
My assistant ended up picking 175 bee stingers out of my scalp. I was okay. I'm not allergic, thank God, to bees. But you know, if you have enough experience,
you kept through it all. You kept falling forward, I bet.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Hey, yeah, real quick before we get into the onesie twosies of what we do when we do out there, here's a couple of mine. Here's me out on the border of South Sudan and Ethiopia with a TKP 47 RCA 1980 refugees swaggered in the background. That's one.
Those are horrible cameras. All the weight was in front of you. Yeah.
They also weighed about 80 pounds.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it was horrible.
Here's me with a Panasonic back in those beta days, Joe.
Yeah.
Over Haiti, down in the ghettos of Haiti. And then, let's see. Here's me with a super 8mm camera on Tiananmen Square in China. So we've kind of been there and done that. I had a bayonet. I was shooting on a bridge. I'll get it right, between Somalia and Uganda, out in no man's land. You ever been in no man's land, Joe?
That's one of my addresses. Yeah. Yeah.
And,
usually where it's not at the end of the world, but you can see the end of the world from there. Yeah.
Correct. So I'm shooting, looking in the eyepiece, and all of a sudden I hear this commotion behind me. Don't look around. Next thing I see is a bayonet slide underneath the camera. That'll stop you. And the talent at the time stopped. I turned around. It's about 6, 8 soldiers in fatigues, and they tell me in their language, it was happened to be Muslim, they want what I'm doing. And we were recording on 1-inch, Joe, 1-inch out in the field with a camera battery of all things. Anyway, long and the short is I pulled the tape out of the camera, out of the 1-inch machine, put it in my satchel, and exchanged it for one I hadn't used. And I put it in the case and handed it to them, and they were happy. And then they motioned with the bayonet, "Get the heck out of here," and pointed at the airplane over on the out on the, not a runway, on the dirt strip. And we saved the shoot because I swapped out the good for the bad. Where else? Oh, yeah, gosh,
I've done that a couple of times. That's essentially what got me tied up at the border of Afghanistan and Pakistan. Was my wife and I were in there shooting, doing some stuff for an organization that said that they had hired 3 different crews to go in and get this stuff, and all of them had left unsuccessfully. And so they proposed that I would do it, but that I would only get paid if I actually brought back the goods. And so I agreed to that, but the price for me coming back with the goods was substantial. So we did it, and the AK-47s were pointed at us, and I did the Arab thing of, you want me, you don't want the woman. I mean, what is the woman going to do? Send her back and you can have me. and they thought that was great. And while we were handing things off, I was shooting 16 millimeter. I pulled the cassette bobbin off the back of the ACL 2 camera, and she put that underneath her clothing. I put an unused one on the camera. They took the film and ran it all over the place, and they were so happy. Kathy took that out and went to the airport and flew out with the footage. So that was a good payday. But yeah, I mean, that's a great trick. Things like that, you know, some of the times it's that the Holy Spirit prompts you to do things.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just that experience of being around the block a couple of times where, you know, really they just want they want a photo for their publicity and an American.
And it always helps. Always helps to have $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 in cash, and so you can buy your way out of those types of situations.
Absolutely, Dan. I always, I have one of those wonderful little belts with a zipper in it, and I have $1,000 in it.
Yeah. One time I was shooting in 1983, Joe, in a tent, a Swiss Army tent on the border of Mozambique and South Africa. Again, in the middle of nowhere. And we go into this tent. I get down in the dirt. I'm panning the perimeter of the inside of the dirt, and everybody's coughing. It's all men. They're all coughing. The whole inside of this huge tent was people. And I came back out and I said to the Swiss Army doctor and the missionary, "What the heck are they coughing for?" And he says, "We don't know. They all have tuberculosis." I said, "Gee, thanks." And but they're all skinny, and we just call it skinny man's disease. And it turns out it was AIDS. The genesis of AIDS. And they quarantined us, Joe, all the way back to JFK. We had to sit in the back of the British overseas airline until it landed at JFK. We were quarantined in the back, about 4 of us, about 4 rows separated from other people. Took us out the back of the plane in the middle of the night to the hospital to get a TB test. So crazy stuff. Hey, let's talk about production. Let's talk about nuts and bolts. What do you look for when you go out for field production, Joe? Let's say outside the church or anywhere else.
Physically, I look for a place where I can work. I want a place that's visual, where it's preferably outside, a place that I can get some good natural light. I look for a place that's not crowded with people. I don't want a whole lot of people around me when I'm working, especially when I'm doing interviews. And so once I find those things, then it also has to pass the sound test. Is there a train station around the corner? Are we, if we're in the Middle East, where's the closest mosque? Because they're going to have the call to prayer 5 or 7 times a day, depending on the flavor of the month. And so it's all of that stuff. The main thing is to keep the people that you're working with, the local people, comfortable, and for them to not get the feeling that this is a big time production, that they're dealing with a friend that they can trust, and this guy will take their story and their identity and protect it and tell the story in a way that will get people to get involved with their work, to pray, to give. And so I look for those kind of things. It's primarily for the safety of the production and the quality of the stuff that we get out.
So location is highly important to what we do. A sterile environment where possible, where you can be an artist and communicate the message as Joe said, both visually in the location and the setting, but also orally the audio, making sure that you're not going to be interrupted. Also testing before you record, what's the RF signal look like, so you don't lose the whole thing audio wise, or at least in and out. I agree with all that. When you went out on the location, Joe, what did you do to prep the shoot as far as equipment wise?
We are so incredibly fortunate today, Dan, with the gear that we have.
Right.
It's just amazing stuff. And it changes amazingly quickly.
Every year or two.
Yeah. And I don't know about you, but I get really tired of paying lots of money to buy new stuff, only to find out that in a year or 2 years, it's old school and nobody wants to use it. So what I do, I have some stuff that I own that has been proven time and again. I can operate this stuff in my sleep, and I probably do sometimes. And that goes with me all the time. I break it apart. It ships so that if I'm going into a place where they don't like professional shooters, I've never been stopped for that reason. And
Right.
I'm definitely a professional shooter. So, it's good to know how not to look professional at times. In
the areas that Joe's talking about, specifically non-friendly locations, it's flying as low as you can, low key, staying under the radar.
Absolutely. And I mean, I can't hide the fact that I'm an American. Some of the people that I've worked with in the past, they could be almost anything, and sometimes that works to their advantage. But I play the American card to the hilt, and I'll often have a Hawaiian shirt on or whatever as I go through airports. I look like a tourist. I don't look like a paramilitary guy who's coming in to take over the world. So that's one of those things. But one thing that we shouldn't overlook is the power of the phone. Our smartphones, almost all the phones that people are using now can record really good high def video. Most of them can record 4K, and I think there's some that are going above 4K now, which is just crazy stuff.
Yeah, it is.
You can use that anywhere, and the primary thing you have to think of with using phones is, not to zoom. You want to get close.
You mean compared to that, Joe?
Compared to that beast, yeah. I mean, it's amazing stuff, and so I would, there's a few audio solutions that I carry with me all the time. One is the small Rode Go 2 wireless system, and that can either be used as a standalone audio recorder, or it can go directly into a camera.
I use Sennheiser, Sony's.
Yeah, I have Sennheisers as well, and I use those when I don't have to hide. But these Rodes are like literally they're tiny.
Hey Joe, when we go out on location, scouting location when possible is very important for lighting, especially location, solitude, focus, all those things that we as producers check off our boxes before the talent shows up. I think that let's go to lighting. We've all done major shoots, I just did a documentary last fall, maybe the last thing I'll ever do as far as producing and directing and shooting, with HMI, outside HMI camera, 5600, lighting, flags, all that stuff. let's say you're out in the field, you don't have the ability to have lights. Tell our listener and viewer what you do. How do you navigate both sun and weather?
Good. Sun, the primary thing is to try to get out of it. If you can find a tree or the side of a building or something that will provide shade, take it. And
I
then,
also quarter. A good point, Joe. I also quarter when you can't. I quarter the talent so he's not head on into the sun, especially if we're using a prompter out in the field,
oh,
uh,
absolutely, yeah.
which is, as you know, brutal.
And when you are using talent that's out there with you, typically they're there for a short time. They'll fly in and expect to hit the ground running, and they basically want things set up as if you were doing a Hollywood production wherever you are, whether you're in the middle of the disaster after a hurricane, or if you're in a slave camp in South in Sudan, just north of the border, wherever you are, they expect stuff to be together, and that anytime that you can make the on-air talent comfortable,
There you
it
go.
really helps. So
Especially that's why scouting is so important. If you can arrive a day ahead of the IP, the intellectual property, the pastor, the preacher, the talent, that's a
right.
good thing because you're far more buttoned up, comfortable, confident, and ready to go. I remember one time I was flying over, gosh, I don't remember, somewhere in Africa. We were flying in a Cessna, single engine Cessna, flying past Mount Kilimanjaro. And I said, why are you flying? It was a missionary aviation fellowship pilot. I said, why are you skirting the tops of the clouds? He goes, oh, that's easy. As we literally to my right was a Kilimanjaro. He says, if a big jet comes, we dive into the clouds. They can't see us. Oh, I said, that's great. And then another time we were flying over Africa and we were looking for refugees that we could feed the next day back to with the talent that we just talked about and find a location that sets up. And we couldn't find them. So we landed on the dirt strip in the like Bells of St. Mary town out in the middle of Africa, and with the single engine Cessna, which way the refugees go, and they point that direction and we take off and we find them. But the long and the short is scouting is very important to your production. End of story.
It's absolutely true. And sometimes, despite everything you've done, it still doesn't, it still doesn't work. I was,
Wow, good point.
I was in, I think it was the Galveston, Texas hurricane. I think it was Ike. I can't remember, but I was down there with a friend that we both have in common, Eric, who is now no longer with us. He died in Kenya. But he and I were there for a few days. We had set up everything perfectly. We had 3 different locations, all nailed down. Everything was great. Our talent was coming in the next day, and I was busy writing stuff, and we were literally at like 3 in the afternoon, and they were coming in early the next morning. And at that point, the U.S. FEMA emergency management group came in and shut down our distribution center, and the Army took it over. And so we packed up everything we could into this tractor trailer and headed down the road. And when we then decided to set up, find our other 2 sites and make sure that they were okay for the next day, the police had closed down that area of the city because of the danger that was there because of all the debris. So we had absolutely zero. And So I just prayed, like, Lord, okay, we've done our best. We've done everything we can.
There you go.
Would really love it if you stepped in at this point. You know where we can go. And
Yeah.
so I said to Eric, okay, I'm going towards Galveston. I'm going to find us a new place. And he's like, brother, we've gone everywhere. We have the place, but we just can't use it. Like, we have to go talk them into it. And like, sometimes you just know when you're talking to a wall. And so I said, okay, Eric, give me the keys. I'll go. And he's like, no, if you're going, I'll go too. I said, okay, only on one condition, and that condition is that you don't say another negative thing until I have the solution worked out.
I have a word for that, Joe. I have a word. We have all shot in, especially you, tornadoes, hurricanes, famines,
Right.
Earthquakes, rubble, you name it. We've been there, done that. Heat, cold. But I have a word for the negativity, and that is, if you're in charge, no's not an option. No's not an option. So you trust God
Absolutely.
that He put you there, and He's trusting you to get her done, and good will come out of it.
That's
People,
what I believe that, Dan. I really do. As we were heading towards the center of the damage, there was just this huge traffic jam, and Eric looked over at me and was ready to say something negative, and I'm like, Nana. So the place that we were at was an entrance ramp onto the road that we were on. I looked down and there were no cars on it because the police had it blocked off at the bottom. I said, okay, let's go down here. He said, it's the wrong way of traffic. I said, I know, just go down here. Like, okay. And we drive down. The local sheriff stops us. What are you boys doing? And so I told him what was going on. And I said, sir, you've seen enough in the past 2 days to know what's bad, where people
That's
are
right.
needing help, where
That's right.
people are that none of the help has gotten to yet.
That's right.
I said, I don't care if it's your friends and neighbors. In fact, I'd love that. But I have a tractor trailer truck of supplies that I want to
That's right.
bring in, and I'll park it wherever you tell me I can park it. And we're going to be doing some television shooting tomorrow. And he said, okay, follow me. And we went down, we found a place that was better than what we had before.
There you go.
We found, I set up interviews with 5 people that were homeowners. We could go bang, bang, bang down the row. The mayor came out and met us. And then once you're hearing yeses, Dan, you know how it is. You just want to keep going.
That's right.
So I said,
It's called momentum.
right. I said to the sheriff, sir, our on-air talent and his team is coming into town tomorrow morning at the private airport. Is there any way, what the traffic's like, is there any way that I can get a police escort? And he said, yeah, I'll set that up for you.
There you
So
go.
for our principal, who you and I both well know, arrived. As we came out, the police were there. He looks at me and says, what's this? And I said, this is the Lord opening doors. And we followed behind them. We had the truck full of supplies. We had the vehicle that I had. We had the primary and another vehicle. So it was a convoy going down to this place. There were police that were stopping traffic at intersections. We got there. Everything was set up. It was just God opening door after door.
And I think, Joe, that happens when, as a field producer, and you're in charge of bringing home the bacon, if you will, that you listen with your spiritual ears while you're listening and watching in the natural, and you're being led by the Spirit. He's ordering your steps. So when we say, when you're going out to do a shoot, open your eyes and open your ears, and take all that we've just told you and apply it to your particular shoot, because you're responsible to bring it home, and no is not an option. So get it done. We're almost done here, Joe. On the same level, with the same one of the people that we both know, we flew to Denver. We flew to Columbine. Shooting had happened 1 or 2 days before. We could drive down the street in Columbine, the suburb of Denver, and we run into this police barricade. You can't go here any further, young man. That's the end of the line. No, we've flown all this way, end of the line. So we backpedal, go around, now what? And the Holy Spirit said, drive around the block, big block, drive around another block. Long and short, as we came around the back of Columbine with the jagged glass in the window of the school. And there was a subdivision. We drove up in the people's driveway and got out. Nobody was there. Walk out the back, and there, sure enough, there was a ball field, and then there was Columbine, the school, jagged glass. And I said, okay, we'll shoot here. It was getting dark. It was like 6:30. And we walk up there, and there was a guy hanging on the fence of the backstop for the ball field, looking out at the Columbine, and a guy hanging on the fence. And I said, sir, we're going to tape here. Do you know what's going on here? Yes, sir. Right there is where my daughter was murdered. It was Daryl Scott. And we interviewed him right there, because no was not an option. And so I say all that to say, when you've got a shoot that you need to do, go through your checklist, your pre-flight checklist, I call it, of equipment, crew, scouting, lighting, audio, copy, and above all, what you want to get accomplished, and you'll be just fine, right, Joe?
That's the thing. I mean, this is not about you. This is not
right.
about your principal talent person. This is about the Lord and about what the Lord's doing. And I always have in my mind the disciples of John the Baptist. You know, they had seen a lot. They had seen Jesus at the River Jordan, and then the voice of God saying, "This is my beloved son." You know, and still John sent his disciples to Jesus to say, "Are you the one?" And Jesus turned to them and said, "Go back to John and tell him what you've seen. The deaf hear, the blind see, the dead are raised again." That's our role. Our role is to go and tell the things that we've seen.
That's right.
And he's given us this technology. He's given us this
Anointing.
this built within us, the anointing, absolutely, Dan, to go out there not just as photographers and
Exactly.
filmmakers and videographers, but to go out there as ambassadors of the King of Kings, and to minister while we're there, not just to take pictures, but to really do the work of him that sent us.
Yeah, you can let your light shine.
That's the thing, and we have to, man. We have
Let your light shine.
You do
Well,
it,
Joe,
and God will bless the rest.
Yeah. Joe, thank you so much. Joe Sindorf, international filmmaker, producer, writer of Grand Rapids, Michigan. Joe, how can they reach you?
Simplest way would be an email, and you can easily give that out to your guys. It's jsindorf@gmail.com. That's the easiest one to remember.
jsindorf@email.com.
Gmail.com, yeah. And or joesindorf.com is a website where you can find out a couple things about me.
Well, I thank you, Joe, for being with us today on Old Men Know Stuff. We might be a little old, but we do know stuff, Joe.
We do know stuff, and we're just so thankful. I know both of us are, Dan, for the ability to use this stuff for
Amen.
His glory.
Amen. Amen. Thank you, Joe. And say hi to your lovely wife.
And to Sheila as well. Thanks, Dan.
Okay. Thanks, everybody, for being with us. We look forward to next Wednesday when you can join us for another episode. We're on, oldmenknowstuff.com YouTube. We're on Twitter. We're on our reels are on IG, on Facebook, and then Buzzsprout. Through Buzzsprout, we're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon, Google Podcast. Anyway, I've lost track, but the point is you can find us. Thanks, Joe.
You don't use cassettes anymore, right?
No, we don't use cassettes. God bless everybody.
See ya.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Old Men Know Stuff. For more information, go to oldmenknowstuff.com.